Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're digging into some sources you shared about recent happenings in Brazilian politics.
That's right. We've got news clips and commentary, particularly from Ricardo Dias on Conectado.
And our goal here is really to pull out the key takeaways for you. We're looking at two main things: Senator Cleitinho, his recent actions, and also this proposed constitutional amendment about re-election and how long politicians serve.
Yeah, and Ricardo Dias's commentary runs through all of it, mostly offering a, let's say, critical view on both the senator's behavior and these potential rule changes.
Okay, so let's jump right in with Senator Cleitinho. The sources talk about him apologizing for something.
Yes, apparently for getting a bit too excited about the influencer Virginia during a formal hearing, a CPI about betting.
A CPI hearing.
Exactly. And Ricardo Dias, well, he didn't hold back, called it pathetic, cringeworthy,
Strong words. Why did it get such a reaction?
Well, Dias's take seems to be about the setting, a serious investigation, and then this sort of fanboy moment as he saw it. It just seemed really out of place.
So the apology followed that.
Right. But Dias frames it less as genuine regret and maybe more like trying to fix the image after, undermining the seriousness of the whole thing.
Right, damage control. But then almost straight away, he's back doing something else.
Yeah, that's the thing. He pivots back to making these denouncement videos. Dias kind of mockingly calls him a blogger or a YouTuber.
Okay, and what was in these videos? One involved the federal police.
That's the main one mentioned. It shows Cleitinho confronting an officer about some seized luxury cars, like really expensive ones.
Seized cars? Why?
Well, Cleitinho was making some really serious claims. He was saying they were bought with stolen money, specifically pension funds meant for retirees.
Wow, okay. That's a big accusation.
Huge. And he's there on camera demanding the police prende los vagabundos, arrest the bums, basically.
Very dramatic.
Totally. And he made sure to show off all the cars, even pointing out a Porsche, things like that. Very visual.
So what's Dias's perspective on this kind of action?
Dias sees it as performative. He calls it showmanship. He even compares him to another politician, Celso Russomano, who's known for similar sort of public displays.
So the criticism is that it's more about getting attention than doing actual Senate work.
That seems to be the core of it. Dias questions if this is the best use of a senator's time and significantly taxpayer money.
Ah, right. He mentioned the cost.
Yeah, pointed out the $44,000 monthly salary plus staff costs, asking if this is what Brazilians are paying for. Kind of implies it's repetitive and maybe not that substantive.
Did Cleitinho offer any reason for his behavior back at the CPI hearing, the Virginia incident?
He did, apparently. He said something about acting as a father for his daughter.
And Dias.
Didn't seem convinced at all. Dias's commentary suggests, a formal hearing isn't really the place for that kind of personal display.
So Dias thinks people are easily fooled by this, the videos, the persona.
It's pretty blunt about it, yeah. He mentions Cleitinho wearing soccer jerseys, the sort of folksy talk, and basically suggests people who fall for it are maybe being a bit naive, especially after what he saw as a lack of seriousness at the CPI.
It sounds like Dias puts him in a category with other politicians who are maybe more focused on online impact.
Exactly. He compared him to Nicolas Ferreira, another figure known for grabbing attention. It suggests a view that this kind of high-visibility, sometimes confrontational style is becoming a trend, maybe overshadowing quieter policy work.
And there was one more detail about that police confrontation. Something about using his ID.
Ah, yes. The carteirada. The reports suggested Cleitinho used his senatorial credentials, basically asserting his authority with the police officer during the encounter.
So not just documenting, but maybe trying to influence the situation using his position.
That's certainly one interpretation, and probably how Dias might see it, another layer to the performance, perhaps projecting power.
Okay. Quite a bit going on there with Cleitinho. Let's shift gears now to the other major topic in the sources. This proposed constitutional amendment, the PEC.
Right, recorded by Daniela Lima on Globo News. And this one sounds like it could be a really big deal for how politics works in Brazil.
What's the main change they're proposing?
Well, the headline grabber is ending re-election for president, governors, deputies, and senators. That system's been in place for, nearly 30 years?
Yeah.
So ending it would be a fundamental shift.
Wow. No more second terms for presidents or governors.
That's the proposal.
Yeah.
But, and this is the really interesting part, they're not just ending re-election.
There's more.
Yeah. They also want to make the terms longer at the same time.
Longer? How much longer?
So senators would go from an 8-year term to 10 years. And president, governor's deputies, they go from 4 years up to 5 years.
10 years for a senator with no possibility of reelection.
Exactly. And this is where Ricardo Dias really takes issue.
Yeah.
He calls the idea absurd. His argument seems to be about accountability. He questions giving someone a 10-year job, essentially, especially if they turn out to be ineffective. He uses the term mal funcionario, like a bad employee.
Without the check of having to face the voters again for that specific seat?
Precisely. He thinks, if anything, mandates should maybe be shorter, like 4 or 5 years, to keep politicians more responsive to the public.
It does raise questions about that balance, doesn't it? Stability versus accountability.
It's a classic dilemma. Longer terms might allow for more focus on policy, less on campaigning. But Dias clearly worries that removing the re-election incentive weakens the link to the voters.
He also mentioned something about retirement.
Yeah, he touched on how quickly politicians can sometimes become eligible for retirement benefits in Brazil, and perhaps imply that longer, single terms might not sit well with the public in that context.
Now, this PEC isn't a done deal yet, right? Daniela Lima mentioned it needs more debate.
Oh, definitely. It's just passed the CCJ, the Constitution and Justice Committee in the Senate. It needs way more discussion and votes.
But Dias was worried about the speed.
He's some concerned that Senator Davi Alcalambra, who heads the CCJ, might try to push it through quickly. Dias seems to feel such a major change needs, proper time for debate, not rush through.
And Dias connected this whole idea of ending re-election to specific figures.
Yeah, he used Lula as an example. He pointed out that if Brazil had term limits like the U.S., Lula wouldn't be president now. It really drives home how these abstract rule changes can have very concrete effects on who holds power.
So tying it all together, Dias's overall take seems pretty negative on both fronts. Cleitinho's actions and this proposed PEC.
Very much so. He seems to see Cleitinho's behavior as self-serving performance, and he views these proposed electoral changes, especially the longer mandates without re-election, as potentially benefiting politicians more than the public.
A kind of self-serving move by the political class.
That's certainly the strong implication from his commentary. A potential reduction in accountability, politicians possibly entrenched for longer without needing voter approval again for that role.
Okay, so just to recap for everyone listening, we've looked at these sources covering Senator Cleitinho's recent controversies, the apology, the videos, the confrontation with Ricardo Dias, providing a pretty sharp critique, calling it performative.
Right, and contrasting that with the other big story, this major proposal in the Senate to end re-election but extend term lengths, which Dias also heavily criticized as potentially self-serving for politicians and bad for accountability.
So Dias's perspective provides this critical lens on both individual political theater and potential systemic changes.
Exactly. He's consistently questioning the motives and the likely outcomes, asking if these things really serve Brazilian democracy or just those in power.
Which leaves us and you with a really important question to think about. If re-election is ended, but terms get significantly longer, what are the long-term consequences?
Yeah, how does that fundamentally change the relationship between politicians and the people they represent? Does it make them more focused on long-term good or less accountable day to day?
Something to definitely mull over, considering all the perspectives we've touched on from the source material. How might it really impact accountability and how responsive officials are in Brazil down the line?
Indeed. Think about those incentives. Does a 10-year term with no re-election encourage bold action or perhaps complacency? It's complex, with potentially huge ramifications.